Beep, 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 beep. Hello, how are you? Welcome to the Court of the EDI Jester, and what have we got for you today? Well, we have part 2 of the investigation by Sanchez Manning in the Daily Fail on the horror that is Stonewall. So, buy me a coffee, come and be a warrior teacher. I need more warrior teachers. Come and be a warrior teacher. More adverts going up in the next few days. Come and join us. Some have already signed up. Waiting for the rest to sign up now. And it's starting at the beginning of August. So please do buy me a coffee, subscribe to my Substack, send me a super thanks, the usual stuff. Thank you so much to everybody that does. Let's, without further ado, get on with it. And it begins, Sanchez Manning begins here with the headline, with Keir Starmer unable to define what a woman is. No wonder Stonewall is targeting Labour's top team. Last month, this is so worrying. Last month, former journalist Ian Anderson and Stonewall Chief Executive Nancy Kelly met with Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and a group of LGBTQ+ business leaders. Did they now? Did they now? This should worry us all. They've got to stop talking to these lobby groups. I mean, Labour isn't going to stop, but the Tories certainly have got to stop. And they need to shut them out and make declarative statements about what they've been up to. Town. It's never going to end. The noise is constant. 9 days prior, Anderson had been photographed alongside senior Labour figures, a beaming Angela Rayner, the deputy leader, and an equally cheerful Annalise Dodds, the party's shadow equality secretary. Now, Dodds, that's the one that looks like some sort of character out of Aardman. I mean, she's absolutely insane. The stuff she puts on Twitter is absolutely a sight to see. So they're meeting with nutters, in my book. It's just how I see it. The comment came from Annalise Dodds, I believe. Great to host UK Labour with Deputy Leader Angela Rayner and Shadow Equality Secretary Annalise Dodds today for a Stonewall UK breakfast with business leaders who want the UK to be the world leading on LGBTQ at work. Ran Anderson's effusive caption on Twitter. Sorry, that was Anderson that had done that. That's the journalist Ian Anderson. All perhaps unremarkable until you consider that as recently as last year, Anderson, who runs a public relations company, it's just like, oh, what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive, who runs a public relations company and is chair of trustees for Stonewall, was a long-standing member of the Conservative Party, not to mention the government's LGBT business champion. So as we've gone back to reality, people like this guy, Ian, have simply floated in some kind of, awful ether of madness closer to the Labour bumfuzzled loonies, right? Anderson resigned after Boris Johnson signalled that trans people would not be covered in the planned ban on conversion therapy. When ministers made a distinction between attempting to change someone's sexual orientation and questioning those who suffered from gender dysphoria, as they call it, which is actually just distress, and it's usually a symptom rather than a cause. It might seem odd for a former Tory grandee to be pictured grinning alongside a Labour shadow minister, and particularly Annalise Dodds. But then the LGBT plus charity Stonewall has a striking track record of latching on to those it thinks are best positioned to influence policy. The forced teaming they've already done with this LGB and the ridiculous TQ they're now trying to get their grubby little fingers into Labour, which I shouldn't imagine would be too difficult because Labour have lost to this a long time ago. While it is, on paper at least, a charitable organisation, in recent years it has become regarded by many as a powerful political lobby group, courtesy of its politicised campaigns to overhaul UK law to accommodate transgender rights. Stonewall rejects such suggestions. Well, in the words of Mandy Rice Davis, they would, wouldn't they? That's not in there, that's just me, right? Yeah, as I argued in the first part of this investigation, despite mounting questions about its conduct and some high-profile bodies parting ties with it, the charity still wields great influence. Now, through freedom of information requests and insider sources, the Mail can reveal the extent to which the charity holds sway over public policy and the behaviour of private firms. Much of Stonewall's power stems from its diversity champion scheme, through which it advises organisations on how to unlock the full potential of the LGBTQ plus workforce. As if there's such a thing. They are deranged, aren't they? You know, it's like a sort of perverted, if you build it, they will come in it. Put a box over there and mark it TQ plus. Throw in the LGBT. See who else turns up. There'll be someone there. How do we control the quality? We don't have to. We just need enough who think the family is a load of shite, who are quite happy to bring down society by unanchoring sex. So just do that. Got it? Right, okay. These people. In recent months, there has been an exodus of government departments and other public institutions from the £3,000 a year programme, among them the House of Lords, the Ministry of Justice, the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the BBC. But according to sex-based rights campaign group Sex Matters, which has been monitoring the number of remaining Stonewall champions, some 47 UK government bodies and quangos remain among the 900 organisations signed up to the scheme. Among them are the Home Office, the Treasury, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, the Environmental Agency and the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, as well as both the Welsh and Scottish governments, Labour and the Green Party. At local government level, 59 councils across the UK are also understood to be members of the scheme. Of course, no one would argue in principle with a programme that sets out to increase tolerance in the workplace. And Stonewall has done laudable work in the more than 30 years since it was founded. Well, unfortunately, I would argue that you shouldn't have any of this. No one would argue. I would argue. Look at me. I'm here, arguing, right? Get stuffed. Do your job. Stop managing people's lives and stop being so bloody behaviourist that you think you can influence everybody in some Pavlovian way. Sod off, right? It then says Stonewall has done laudable work in more than 30 years since it was founded, right? Which is, I imagine the legal department told him to put that in. In recent years, however, it's like saying, you know, he didn't murder before he murdered. In recent years, however, the charity has pivoted into pushing a disputed ideology that promotes, speech marks, gender identity above biological sex, a crusade that critics believe now underpins its every move and is being waged via the Trojan horse of its earlier credibility. Fantastic comparison drawn there. Its every move is now being waged via the Trojan horse of its earlier credibility. Brilliantly put. The reason Stonewall is so successful is that it's using the legacy of credibility that we built up from the successful campaigns between 1989 and 2014, says Simon Fanshawe, Simon, one of the original founders of Stonewall, who has since become disillusioned with the charity's approach. It is misusing that legacy because it's no longer making alliances. It is now making total demands. Certainly, while Stonewall has repeatedly insisted that its diversity champions guidance has no bearing on legislation or internal parliamentary discussion, its fingerprints can be found everywhere. It knows what it's doing. The charity's presence is felt particularly keenly in the Scottish government. Last year, the then First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, introduced new laws allowing transgender people to change their legal gender without a medical diagnosis. The problem with this article is it's brilliant stuff, and I'm really pleased to see it, but it uses the language of the cult. You've got to stop using it. So that sentence should have said, really, Sturgeon introduced new laws allowing men to change their legal gender without a medical diagnosis. There has been this has long been a key in Stonewall objective in 2015 campaign for changes to the Equality Act to remove single-sex exemptions, which would allow pre-operative men, in other words, and they put trans women as two words, it's not as one, access to female changing rooms and toilets. In its latest annual report in January, the organisation even boasts that it had a direct hand in helping to secure a commitment from the Scottish Government to reform its gender recognition laws. The legislation was ultimately blocked by the British Government on the basis that it could have a wider impact on UK equality laws. Even that's not true. The UK government said, come back with another idea and it wasn't the UK government that said that, if I remember right, it was the Scottish Justice Minister. So let's get our facts right here. Notably, none of the ensuing controversy stopped the Welsh government from pledging earlier this year that ministers will seek a devolution of powers from the UK in order to make Wales's gender recognition laws similar to the legislation approved in Scotland. According to Stonewall, its manoeuvres regarding gender self-ID laws are standard charitable campaigning and not to be conflated with the advice it hands out through its workplace diversity schemes. This boondoggle needs stopping. They need to close these buggers down. Just awful. Yet its tentacles have also strayed into other areas of policy in Scotland and Wales. In 2021, under pressure from the charity, the Scottish Civil Service agreed to delete the word mother from its maternity policy in a bid to be more LGBT friendly. I wish they'd point out it's nothing to do with the LGBs. That actually LGBTQI has got gay people in it, has got lesbians in it, but they're Fruit Loops and nut jobs, right? And they're stupid. They believe in rubbish. That's not the same as gay people. Right, who believe in reality and science and facts and truth and the fact that we've got a good civilization. These are the nutters. So I wish they'd point that, when they say it, LGBTQI+, I wish they would then say that has nothing to do with lesbian gay people and bisexuals. They're a separate thing, because that's their label, LGBTI. They have to be under that banner to be seen as a nutso. So I wish they'd start making that distinction. According to documents seen by this newspaper under Freedom of Information laws, the change was made, deleting the word mother, on recommendations from a Stonewall feedback report on the Scottish Government's ranking in the Workplace Equality Index, which at the time was 101. So they're looking to jump up this ranking thing, it's ranking thing. It's like children, isn't it, trying to please daddy. Or in this case with Stonewall, mummy. Yep, that's what it's like, isn't it? Grow up. Get rid of all of these boondoggles. They've all got to go. There's another one in Manchester I told you about the other day, all about whatever it's called. Some nonsense. The All Equals Charter. Give us your money to tell us, so I can tell you your crap. That's what it is. In the same report, Scottish Permanent Secretary Leslie Evans said improving its rating would be a priority and pledged to implement an action plan based on Stonewall's feedback. The government's doing the work of Stonewall. It's not governing. They've been captured. Stonewall's annual report this year also gloats of its ongoing influence in Wales, saying it supported the Welsh Government to develop and launch a 58-point action plan to support LGBTQ plus people's safety, visibility and inclusion in organisations in sports in schools across Wales. So what they've done is the same sort of thing as Sheffield University's done. I did a report, one of my videos a few months back tonight, do you remember, about Sheffield University, which I never finished because it was so vast, the amount of capture and the disgusting ideas that Sheffield University was throwing about, that I just never got round to it. I've been overtaken by circumstances. But I think there's about 4 parts if you want to go find it. You'll find it on my YouTube channel. In turn, the Welsh Government has announced that its position on transgender people, which unfortunately is not in speech marks, is unequivocal. Trans women are women. Trans men are men. And non-binary identities are valid. It's spelled out in bold in a policy document on February, so they put it in bold. They'll get it. Put it in bold. They'll have it. Times New Roman. Calibri. Bold it. In bold in a policy document. Yeah, a Welsh women's activist from the feminist group Murchid Cumbra says that this is opinion, not fact. It's alarming that the Welsh Government has adopted this hard-line ideological position. Women and girls face discrimination and violence because of sex, not subjective senses of reality. In recent months, meanwhile, the charity focus has pivoted towards the bill to ban the controversial practice of conversion therapy. Stonewall wants gender identity to be covered in the planned ban, in addition to sexuality. It argues that transgender people are one of the groups at highest risk of conversion practices in the UK. That's a really strange sentence. Stonewall wants, right, it argues that transgender people are one of the groups at highest risk of conversion practices in the UK. Right, think about that. What that should say is, it argues that transgender people are one of the groups at the highest risk of needing mental health help in the UK. That's what it should say. But they're saying, never mind the fact that they're mentally ill, that they're unwell, deeply unwell. Never mind that. Or that they're just simply girls and boys caught up in the social contagion. Or LARPing men wanting titty skittles. Ignore that. They're still the groups at highest risk of conversion therapy. They want it to be real. They want gender identity to be real. Of course they do. Yet many psychologists and medical practitioners have warned that including trans people in the bill risks criminalising anyone who dares to question a young person who is confused about their gender. Any young person who is confused about their gender should be traumatised by the reality. Stop farting about with this. Stop farting about. There should be no intervention of any health kind based on a stupid thing called gender identity, invented in 1950. Nutters. Right? They argue that the legislation would leave therapists who wish to explore whether there are other issues at play, such as mental health and sexuality. You don't have to explore it, there are. If you think that you've got a gendered soul that God got wrong, and that to put it right, you've got to cut off your own genitals and your cock and balls and your vagina and your breasts and mutilate yourself in order to feel better, you are mentally ill. It's not complicated. So they're worried that any conversation that was not affirming, oh yes, you're one of you are a boy, you're not a girl, you are a man, you're not a woman, you are a woman, you're not a man. It's all this yes, we'll agree, we affirm, strokey, strokey, we affirm. Anything that goes beyond that will in effect be criminalised. And what it also does is it removes the fact that without that legislation currently, trans is conversion therapy specifically for gay children. So it's essentially conversion therapy for gay boys and girls, mostly girls, but now boys as well, for both of those, and it involves genital mutilation. So what they're arguing for at Stonewall is we want to genitally mutilate gay kids because they don't conform to our notion of how a woman or a man should be. That's what it is. It's gay conversion therapy. Without the bill, you add trans to the bill, and the fact that they're homosexual is something that's being converted, and it will be embedded in law. This must be stopped at all costs. The Mail can reveal that this has not stopped Stonewall's demands from gaining traction within Labour, even after it was said that the conversion bill would not include trans nonsense. There is mounting evidence that the group is stepping up its efforts to forge links with the party ahead of the next election. I've said this before and I'll say it again. All you lovely lefties out there, get ready to tick the box, mark Conservative, because if you don't, you are going to sentence children to genital mutilation once they've gone through the first part of the trans train, i.e. I'm going to socially transition, we know 90% go right the way through it. You tick the box for Labour in this next election, and you are sacrificing gay and lesbian children to the butchery of gender identity and the likes of Stonewall. And that, I know, is a hard pill to swallow, but you'll swallow it. Because if we can keep the Labour out, we can then deal with any excesses that come from the Tories. I don't think there'll be any, but we could. All right? I know it's hard. It's a horrible decision to make, but we may have to do it in order to save gay and lesbian and autistic children. Think about that. When you go in there and you hover over some other party other than one of the main two, and then you get to the Conservative box and the mouth dries up and you think, I've never done it in my life before, but you're going to do it now. Because if you don't, you are going to sacrifice gay, lesbian and autistic children to genital mutilation. The eventual genital mutilation that follows sterilisation, medicalisation, social transition. That's what you will be doing. Following the criticism, some argue that this won't be a challenge. They're trying to get Labour to do it, considering that Sir Keir Starmer has been able to define what a woman is. Keir Starmer will fold. In a second, he'll fold, because all the unions are gone. And Labour leaders are all union willy suckers, aren't they? Right. Following his criticism of Labour MP Rosie Dufford for saying that only women have a cervix, he clarified his position by saying that 99.9% of women haven't got a penis. What an idiot. Implying that 1 in 1,000 do. One Labour insider revealed to the Mail that Stonewall boss Nancy Kelly held a Zoom call with Labour staff members earlier this year. This is interesting. According to one attendee, Kelly talked about Britain having a gender-affirming health service and how she wanted the next Labour government to bring in a Bill of Rights that would put non-binary and intersex terms into legislation. She went on to accuse the media of manufacturing a war against transgender people that was not representative of the views of the general public. Oh, you disingenuous, gender-addled grievance gerbil, Kelly. 3 months after this meeting, labelled a briefing by one party source, a document was leaked dealing Labour Hollis's programme, which was widely seen as a blueprint for its next general election manifesto. It contained a promise to introduce a full trans-inclusive ban on conversion practices, while also modernising the process of gender recognition. That's self-ID, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Ticking that box getting easier? The box marked Tory, ticking it, is it getting easier up here now? Ask yourself. Clearly aware of the ongoing rub between transgender rights and women's rights, the policy document talks about building consensus and upholding the Equality Act's provision of single-sex exemptions. So what they're going to do is they're going to both sides it. He thinks it's political. They think it's political. It's not political, it's cultural and moral. Right versus wrong. It's the Skopsy of Russia. The testicle-removing lunatics. All that stuff. But there remains concern among women's groups such as Labour Women's Declaration. In April, it published an article condemning the party's continuing involvement with Stonewall and calling for it to review its annual subscription and membership fees to an organisation it referred to as increasingly discredited. Oh, yes, Oh, yes. They continued, Stonewall is a well-funded lobby group with corporate links and funding, it said. It's not a democratic campaign, and it's increasingly out of step with the views of lesbian and gay people, most certainly. The Labour Party should not be paying a lobby group to mark its own homework. Wonderful. Wonderfully put there, wonderfully put by the Labour Women's Declaration. Yet according to Malcolm Clark, hello Malcolm, how are you, you wonderful man? A TV producer and co-founder of LGB Alliance, a gay rights group set up in opposition to trans activism being promoted by the charity, it is no surprise that Stonewall's philosophies have taken root so firmly. It's no accident, says Malcolm, that when you're being judged by Stonewall if you sign up to its various schemes, the number one demand it makes is that you set up an LGBTQ staff group, or as I've called it before, an affinity group. So, even where it's being pushed out, its influence remains through the groups it has helped to set up. A claim Stonewall denies. It's rubbish. Of course the influence remains. I've spoken to these people. You bet the influence remains. They're on the bloody phone to Stonewall when nobody's looking. He points out that the revelation last December that 1 in 5 FTSE 100 firms are being advised on diversity and inclusion by Stonewall suggests the organisation is also pivoting its focus to big business. Clark said, there is a lot of concern within Stonewall about government institutions waking up to the impartiality problem and pushing it out. So Stonewall realises it's going to be hard to keep the same presence within government institutions, hence its push on business, its big push on business, because companies don't have to be impartial in the way institutions are. It was never a money-making thing, it was about influence. Here you see now, interestingly, this particular paragraph ties into the recent stories about how the banks are behaving towards normal people. Canceling their bank accounts for having wrong thing. Tesco's, Asda, Sainsbury's, who else isn't involved in this LGBTQI plus cult nonsense? Who else isn't? Right, that's the question. It was never a money-making thing, it was always about influence. Oh yes. Whether it's intention, there is no disputing that Stonewall's made a lot of money, much of it from the public purse. In 2021 it received a staggering 2.1 million of taxpayers' money, including National Lottery community funding and £616,000 in coronavirus support grants, while annual accounts for the financial year up to March 2022 suggested this figure has dropped. It still received £400,000 of government funding. Our money! Then there's the separate payments for diversity training, among them from the Ministry of Defence, which paid more than £80,000 for advice. I could have done it for 80 quid, you twats. And the Department of Education, which forked out more than £20,000 over 5 years. Ministry of Defence and Department of Education. How we teach our people, how we protect our people. Both infiltrated and therefore poisoned by Stonewall. It's a head spinner, isn't it? It's a head spinner. Money well spent? Question mark. It is a matter of opinion. Either way, as one government insider told the Mail, you couldn't put a price on the influence Stonewall's had on the government and national organisation over the years. Last night, a Stonewall spokesman hit back at the concerns raised over its level of political influence, saying, as the UK's largest LGBTQ plus hands, knees and bumps a daisy charity, it is a natural and completely normal for us to be at the heart of national discussions around LGBTQ plus equality. You know as well as I do it's got sod all to do with that. It's critical social justice, right? It's the nonsense merchants with their intersectionality and their load of crap about social constructionism. It's got nothing to do with gay and lesbian people. And I do wish the newspapers would start saying so. I mean, they did here. To their credit, they did here. But, you know, when LGBT, they should put it in speech marks and say, not representative of lesbian and gay people or bisexuals. Perhaps the last word on the subject should go to the person who was there at the charity's inception, Simon Fanshawe. Morning, Simon. Afternoon, Simon, wherever we are. Stonewall, said Simon, has long had a powerful influence, but this is no longer predicated on its credibility. Sadly, in a political climate where disagreement is regarded as bigotry, that influence is now based on fear. Well said, Simon. I'm not of the mind that Simon is, and you can see in that statement what Simon says there. Where disagreement is regarded as bigotry is that he thinks there's a point of agreement. There is no point of agreement. None. We have institutions backing organisations who are culpable in the mutilation, sterilisation, medicalisation and social transition of gay, lesbian, autistic and confused children who are once put on the train are very likely to damage their bodies beyond repair. I don't know how we find agreement with these people. We end them. And that now, from my perspective, is the only way forward. The transgender guidance, whatever you want to call it that, I call it the reality guidance, must make clear the iatrogenic nature of this entire belief system and must expunge it from schools on pain of firings, prosecutions, whatever it takes to end the concept of the trans child, to end the concept of the trans woman and the trans man, and just call them what they are, men and women with mental difficulties. Sorry, gone too far, came for the kids, especially the gay ones. Shouldn't have done that, you bunch of nutters. I'll see you later, good folk.